our education is non-existent. I mean, the word educare, to lead you out from the darkness to the light. Our education, when our founders knew it, was meant to make you a better man. Education today is meant to make you a more obedient subject.
Welcome to And If Love Remains. This is Mike Levitt, and I am absolutely thrilled to have in studio today a good friend of mine, Dr. Joe Wolverton. Joey, say hi.
Hey, how you doing? Good to see you.
It's good
Happy
to see
be
you.
Here with you, Mike.
It's good to have you here. I've been thrilled, been wanting to do this for a while. And
that's been on me. I just haven't made myself properly available, but finally vacation's over, and so it's all good.
It's all good. This is perfect timing. We can talk about a few things that are going on right now that I think would be great. A little bit about Dr. Wolverton, Brother Joe. He is a graduate of BYU. Where did you go to law school?
I went to law school at the University of Memphis, which is where that's my hometown. Okay.
University of Memphis. And then did you do any other postgraduate?
No, just after law school. I did a seminar on, which is going to sound funny, but I did a seminar on the tax implications of home ownership.
Hey.
So I did an extra, year of law school that most people don't do just for that reason. But then right after law school, I started teaching at a university and did that for a year, and then got hired at a law firm in Nashville and just started practicing law.
Okay. All right. And couple of things. He's written a few books. One is on probably the one of the great books on James Madison. Yeah,
that was my first published book, was called The Real James Madison. And it was just my attempt to shine a different light on Mr. Madison, because I read every biography that comes out about him, and it seems like too often they focus on either the duplicity, as they call it, of Mr. Madison, which I call it his consistency, which to people that aren't consistent looks like duplicitous. And also too many people focus. Even one of the latest ones, which was by Lynn Cheney, she spent so many pages on his illness. Well, that paints him in the wrong picture, because he overcame all of that. He was literally a priest was called. He was born at midnight at his grandma's house. His dad was away on business, and his mom was, as was the custom back then, his mom was staying with her mom down the road a little bit from where he lived. And the baby, he was born at midnight, and he was so small and sickly that his grandma called for the Anglican priest to come administer last rites. And not only did he survive that night, which they thought he wouldn't, he became the last surviving founding father. So to paint him as a sickly man who, had all these disadvantages, I thought was wrong. So, and also, he's a very religious man. He came from a very religious family. His name, or the guy for whom he was named, James Madison, the preacher, the Reverend James Madison, they call him, a great member of his family. And so, but biographies don't focus on that. I think by design, to try and portray those men as deists, which James Madison most certainly was not. And I wanted to restore that. And I wanted to restore a bunch of the articles, essays that Madison wrote in the 1790s on a series of subjects. And he was refuting Alexander Hamilton, who was trying to recreate the government based on his own idea of what government should be. And so Thomas Jefferson famously wrote Madison a letter and said, "Good God, take up thy pen." And so Madison did, and he wrote a series of what they called at the time the Republican essays, Republican with a small r.
Right.
And they hadn't been at all reproduced in a biography for over 100 years. So I reproduced them in their entirety. And I mean, you just get blown away by the man's intellect and by his devotion to liberty, individual liberty.
Well, I want to ask you about that. Where did that passion for liberty for the founding fathers, where did that come from in you?
For me, I don't know. That's a question everybody always asks, and I don't know the answer to it. We were talking earlier today, questions I don't have answers to in my life, but one of them is that I know that I remember being a young kid, 5th grade maybe, and I was into comic books, and I used to buy the Thor comic book and Batman and Superman. And so
right.
I remember the back of one of the comics, they had this thing about cards you could order that were all about the Revolutionary War. And I asked my dad, because I by the time I was in 5th grade, my dad's like, if you want to buy extra stuff, you got to do so. So I would mow our neighbors' lawns. And I was a big kid at 5th grade. I was already, probably nearly 6 feet tall in 5th grade. And so I would mow lawns early in the morning. And so I bought these cards and I just memorized them. It was all the battles and all the key players.
Wow.
I have no idea where it comes from. And then when I went on my mission, for example, my uncle, this is back when you could do proper farewells. My uncle spoke at my farewell, and he asked my mom the night before, he's like, do you have a copy, like one of Joe's first copies of the Book of Mormon? And she's like, well, I have the one that he got when he was baptized. And so I had one verse marked in it, and it was about how the Gadianton robbers had taken over the government. And I don't know why, literally one verse. And so where it comes from, I believe it's something I brought with me to earth. And so I don't remember not caring. And it's something I remember even in school, my teachers being, how do you know this, or why do you care about this, and not having a good answer. So I still don't have a good answer.
I think that's a great explanation, if not an answer. That's an interesting, and I say this because not only did you write the book, but you became a teacher. You've taught this stuff. In fact, one of the greatest accolades, credits that I can give to you is that I allow you to teach my children. We have a small homeschool group here that we invite you to come and teach. And I think you have several groups like that. Mm-hmm. And I think you've enjoyed that. Do you prefer that?
Oh, I absolutely. I taught at a charter school here in Arizona for, I guess, 5 years. And I taught as much as I could. And I know that I was sent there for a purpose to find certain people. And so it was good in that way, but I was always handcuffed, always prevented from doing certain things. An example I always give is when I wrote the original manuscript for the real James Madison, the publisher was insistent that it not contain so many religious quotes from Mr. Madison. And one of the ones I snuck in was when he graduated from Princeton, which at the time was called College of New Jersey, but it's what we call Princeton. His best friend, William Bradford, wrote him a letter and said, James, you're brilliant. You can be anything you want. What are you going to do? And James Madison, he's 21. He writes back and he says, I might go into law. I might go into the clergy, which back then was really the only reason you'd go to college, right? Unless you're going to be a professor, I suppose. But if you weren't in the clergy or a lawyer, why did you go to college? So he's like, I don't know what I'll do, but of all the things I might do, the one thing I'm going to make sure is that whatever I do, my name remains recorded in the annals of heaven. I don't want my name stricken from the book of life. That's my most important goal.
Sounds like a deist to me.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Very, very deistic. And so that's the sort of thing. And so finally, when I made the decision, a very difficult decision financially above all things, I suppose, was to leave the charter school, was I'm only going to teach homeschool kids because I'm doing education the way the founders did it. James Madison's dad, they were not wealthy people. We were taught to think they're wealthy. They weren't wealthy. They had a lot of land, but they couldn't put their hands on a lot of cash. So James Madison's dad got with other dads in the area, and they hired a teacher. And this teacher taught them about the history of Rome and Greece, and they're Latin historians, and basic things like that, English history. And he was accountable to Mr. Madison, Mr. Taylor,
right?
All of these, Mr. Clark, all of these men. He was responsible, and that's the way I wanted it. I wanted to know if I was offering a valuable lesson by whether or not people would pay me to do it. Because as a teacher at a charter school, I'm going to get paid the same every 2 weeks, whether I'm teaching powerful, inspiring lessons or not.
Right.
I could phone it in. We could sit there and we could have watched a video every day, and I'm still going to get the same amount of money. Today, if I don't teach something that people want their kids to learn, then I'm going to have to do something else.
Well, and having sat in a few of your classes, it is a unique experience. And nothing like anything I took in a high school civics class or
nor I, I tell the kids that I one of the books we read is Algernon Sidney's Discourses Concerning Government, which was known as the textbook of the Revolution. It's one of the 5 books that Jefferson and Madison said you had to read to understand America. And Jefferson said, as soon as a boy is old enough to understand the written word, that book should be placed in his hands. And so it's one of the books we read. When I was given this, and it's a long story of how I got there, but when I got to the point where it was shown to me that these were the things I was supposed to teach, it took me 5 years to read Discourses Concerning Government because I didn't understand it. And I could prove it to you. I have sitting right next to me here on the table the original copy that I had, and I used a digital copy when that became available. And it took me 5 years. It takes some of these kids 5 weeks.
Wow.
And you see, that has nothing to do with me. I offer them discourses where otherwise they wouldn't know what it was. But the fact that they understand it and can read it in 5 weeks, that has to do with them and with God, frankly.
Yeah, I concur. I hear what you're saying. You've written a new book, and I want to talk a little bit about What Degree of Madness, which is Madison's method to make America states again.
Right.
And I want to get into this. I think this is a very timely, more timely than probably you suspected when you wrote it.
That's true. Yep. That's
I mean, this is a great book. I want to ask you, though, kind of more fundamentally, your view. I happened to be in your class today, and you talked about not having contempt for the founding generation.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of views today on the founding generation. Part of it is because we're so removed, because we don't read this stuff. So it runs the gamut of almost deification on one end to they're nothing but white slaves or slave owners on the other end, to the Constitution is nothing but a crony capitalistic way to get to get all the debt paid off and have everybody make a lot of money on the side. And part of it, I think, is when we say the founders, because we don't read enough, we clump these founders into one big basket, like it's the same person.
Right.
And so we don't understand all the interesting individuals that were in there. So I want to get your general take. Who were if you were to describe the average, I don't know, I'm going to group them all together, but the founding generation, what made them unique? Were they unique? What is your take on that?
I think when I say founding fathers, and I've defined it because for the book that's coming out in a couple of weeks, the Founder's Recipe book, I say in there, when I say founding fathers, I'm defining that as men who participated in any of the Continental Congresses, the Stamp Act Congress, the Declaration of Independence, and the Constitutional Convention, or any of the state ratification conventions.
Okay.
So to me, I count those, and they overlap, right?
Right.
Many of them overlap. So there's give or take, and I could pull up the exact number, but that I used. But in my estimation, the way I sort of my taxonomy, there's about 200 men who I call founding fathers.
Okay.
Now there are, even within that 200, there are what I call the varsity and the junior varsity. Right. There are guys who, if I said name a founding father, everyone would say his name. There are other guys who, if I said name a founding father, these guys would never be named. But at the time of the founding, they were well known and were influential.
I think about that even like in the Bible. If you even have like your name said once in the Bible, you were probably a pretty prominent, important dude.
Precisely. That's exactly the same thing. And so, yeah, you're saying that today we see them as monolithic. And I can tell you, in my opinion, and having studied it, and it's not just an opinion. People like to attack me and say, well, you're trying to look at this from one angle. And I really am not. I wanted to go in originally, and I don't want to deify these men, mainly because these men themselves said, don't deify us. Right. And so I wanted to find out the iron, the feet of clay, so to speak. And when I went in and to see what, why they are so unique, the thing I came to, Mike, was education. When at the time of the so-called Civil War, Abraham Lincoln created a federal office of education. That just, once the muscle of tyranny develops in a government, it never atrophies. It only grows. You never have the muscle of tyranny. You have to cut it out. Yes, you have to you have to physically cut it out. So it grew and grew and grew. And by the time with all the attempts in the 1800s to foist upon the United States the Prussian model of, we're not trying to make enlightened people, we're trying to make good workers. By the time that became the norm across the country, the notion that we were ever going to have a generation like our founders was gone, because we weren't going to read what they read. We weren't going to be taught the way they were taught. We were taught by bureaucrats. We were going to be taught all from the same books, which frankly drink downstream. We read what somebody thought about what somebody else wrote about what somebody else did. That's what what others greater than me, what I always repeat is, that's drinking downstream. Yeah. And the water down there is mucky and who knows what's in it. But we drink from it because we're told that's where you get water. So what made them special? They grew up at a time when education was still, and that was, from Athens onward, that was the responsibility of your parents. If you were brought to the earth by a man and a woman, that man and woman took responsibility for feeding you, clothing you, and educating you. It was nobody else's responsibility. And when that went away, when it went to the point where the government forcibly takes money from one man to educate, giant air quotes, the child of another. Scare quotes. Yes, scare quotes. When that became the norm, then we never learned anything that made these men who they were, and we didn't learn the truth about who they were. I've done the experiment in my charter school classroom because these companies would send me textbooks to use, and I would show them, this is what the textbook says, because I would use only primary and secondary documents, and I would show them on the screen so we could all learn and see that it was true, and they didn't have to think, is Joey lying to us? Is he trying to make us believe a certain way? No, I want you to drink right from the source, and they could see for themselves, here's the book you'd be using if I wasn't here. And here's what they tell you. And here's what we read the men themselves. That makes a big difference. And you come to see that the things that so many people see as black and white were more nuanced to the founders because they were, frankly, wiser and better educated than us.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that we miss from not knowing the stories and not knowing who these men were. And again, it's almost like not trying to dismiss any of their faults or dismiss and the fact that they had fights and disagreed with one another and had,
I opened the book with the fight that Patrick Henry and James Madison had.
Right.
Those are two men that I look up to. And frankly, in that argument, I think Patrick Henry was right.
Right.
But that's because I'm standing 200 and something years farther down the road. At the time, Madison, what Madison says, and even to this day, makes sense and could be, like I say, his method to make America states again. He could save us from our problems, but Madison and Patrick Henry were both varsity squad founders. They disagreed with each other on many things.
I want to read, this is from page 7 of the book. This is from chapter 2. Madison cannot be convinced that Americans would ever debase themselves to become subjects to arbitrary power, too lazy to reclaim their hard-won liberty from, quote, from the hands of their oppressors, end quote. These heirs of the revolution would never be brought to a state of, quote, blind and tame submission to the long train of insidious measures, end quote, and would result in an all-powerful federal authority and the obligation of the states as sovereign powers. This idea that Madison could not imagine an American people that would give up their rights, that would see the fact that he thought that the American people would always see through the veiled intricacies, the pleadings, the veiled ways that people use to bring tyranny to us. Right. He thought that for sure, according to what I read, that we would see right through it. Yeah. Where was he wrong?
Well,
or was he wrong?
He wasn't wrong for his generation. He was wrong in that we didn't remain educated and virtuous. He genuinely believed that we as an American people had such an experience, such a history, such a culture that nothing would ever be able to pry us from the liberty that we had enjoyed, lost, and reclaimed. And he says it in the Federalist. He's like, it's impossible. Patrick Henry is saying this government that you've created in this Constitution will swallow up the liberties of the people and the states.
Why did he say that? What were his arguments that
Patrick Henry?
Yeah.
Oh, well, Patrick Henry says you've got nearly unlimited taxing authority. You have got a government that is going to be one system of law for such a disparate people. How can you expect to have one set of governing standards from people all the way from, New York to Georgia? Mm-hmm. How could that be possible? And he said, so you have that. You don't have any overt, any obvious protections for certain liberties, because Patrick Henry was in favor of a Bill of Rights.
Right.
And he said, so you have unlimited taxing power. You've created another layer of government that has impact on the individual, which we never would have accepted. And he said, you have no overt protections for basic liberty. And he said, that is the recipe for disaster, for ultimately tyranny that saps, as he would call it, the manhood of America.
And what was his rebuke?
Madison was, what degree of madness? How crazy do you think we would have to be? There's no way, he says in the Federalist, that Americans would see this deluge of despotism, right? They would not stand out in the rain. knowing that the rain was toxic and that the toxic rain was being created by a tyrant, and continue to fund the tyrant. But that's exactly what we do. And Madison, he said, that will never happen.
And so he says that would never happen. And yet he does give, or the Constitution gives solutions on when that happens, what we should do.
Not the Constitution. See, that's his thing. Not overtly in the Constitution, not explicitly, but he says, let's pretend, he says. And he said, let's pretend that somehow we've all gone crazy. Here are ways that even with this Constitution in force, we could still force the federal beast back inside his constitutional cage. He says there are remedies that are powerful, as he called them, powerful and at hand, meaning easily used, easily employed. And those are what I go on in the book, not only to say, so the book, it starts with, here's the things Madison said would never happen, and here's the fact that they happened.
Yeah.
And then, but I end the book with, there's hope. And the hope is, here's what he said. Here's what he said. If those things were to happen. Now, yes, he believed they wouldn't, but as a wise man, he said, let's suppose for whatever reason, Americans lose their love of liberty and lose their virtue. Here are the ways that they can reclaim it.
Well, and the first way that we can reclaim it is by buying your book.
That'd be nice.
Yeah. What Degree of Madness, Madison's method to make America states again. Where can we find the book at?
Amazon.
Amazon?
Yep. Just Amazon. I think it's $14.99.
All right.
Like that. Yeah.
And then tell me about this new project you're working on, the Founder's Recipe book.
Well, I want to end up really quickly with the What Degree of Madness, just to say that when I wrote this, it was pre-plague.
Oh, yeah. I wanted to talk about that. Thank you.
And
yes.
that much of the things I say are like, these are things we could do. Now it seems like these are things we have to do.
Thank you. Yes. And in fact, I'm going to set what I was going to say to the side. And I do want to talk about that because I think it's vital for people to know what if there's one or two. I said one thing is read your book.
Yeah.
But what's one or two things that our listeners can take away to say, okay, what can I do? I'm starting to feel uncomfortable with governors having unlimited power to do whatever they want and nobody speaking up and so and a lot of other things that are going on when it comes to riots. I mean, we're seeing mayors that are obfuscating their responsibility, and then we're seeing the federal government going in and taking over. I mean, we're seeing all kinds of really crazy things that 6 months ago we would have thought this is the end of the world if we saw it. So if people who are starting to feel uncomfortable are starting to feel like there's some problems that I need to try to solve, what are a couple of things they can do?
Okay. The first will probably seem, people are going to roll their eyes when I say it because they always do. But after you roll your eyes, roll them back the other way and really close your eyes and think about what I'm saying. The first and most powerful step toward reclaiming our liberty is to restore our personal virtue. If we are going to have free communities, we must have, as the founders would say it, there is no liberty without virtue. Well, that applies to you as an individual and to us as a country. So if you want to have a free country, you need a free state. If you want a free state, you need a free city. If you want a free city, you need a free neighborhood. If you want a free neighborhood, you need a free home. So then you just apply the word virtue. In order to have that freedom, you must have virtue. It's the, as the Latins would call it, the sine qua non, the without which nothing. Mm-hmm. There is no liberty without virtue. It's one of the little, I have a wristband that all my students end up ordering. It says, it's white for virtue. It says, there is no liberty without virtue.
Can we define virtue a little bit?
Virtue, well, it's
because I think that's a word people you think about religiously, like they don't think about what that means.
Well, virtue, as the founders knew it comes from the Latin virtu, which means it's from the same root vir, meaning man. So virtue meant manliness. Now, I know many people out there will be like, well, what about if you're a woman? You know, it basically means courage to do the right thing when it's hard. You know, this morning with your kids and with another family, we read where Algernon Sidney said, you know, the thing that kept Rome free for so long is that people were willing to be virtuous when being virtuous was punished, was nearly impossible. And so that's being virtuous just means doing the right thing when it's difficult. So it can be religious, and in my opinion, should be. I think most of the founders would have told, and again, this is where we get not monolithic founders, but someone like Sam Adams, for example, someone like John Adams would have said, you're not going to have a free people, a virtuous people without the underpinning of religion. Right. And I agree with that. But even if you don't, I'm in a camp with a bunch of people who don't agree. I have people that are on my side of this discussion that are atheists. Now, I don't think that will last, but for right now, the point is doing the right thing, doing that which maintains liberty in the face of all other things. So there is no liberty without virtue, meaning you can't be free unless you want good for yourself and for others. And so what you do is, my first step, back to your question, the first step is square yourself away with your own personal virtue. And then if you're a parent, square your family away. Make sure your home is a home governed by virtue. And that will make you an example. Mike, if we had all the people who claim to worship Christ try their very hardest to live the gospel of Christ in their home, we wouldn't be having this discussion. So the first step, restore virtue to your home. After that, the step is do what you can to find like-minded people. Because ultimately, it's going to come down to we're going to have to divide into smaller societies of people that agree on basic principles. Because all of the fighting in our country now is because we are so disparate. We don't share principles, and that's okay. We don't share principles. Why must we be gathered together under one banner when that banner means something different to all of us? And to some of us, it's a banner that represents slavery, that represents oppression. That's fine if you feel like that. I would die for your right to have your own society where you never had to speak of George Washington. That's fine with me. Take your people, here's some land, do your thing, and I'm going to do likewise, but I'm going to teach a story of the virtues of Washington. And then we don't fight anymore.
I think that's a powerful statement. I think that people, I had a conversation with somebody close to me, where I was trying to explain that we're talking about whether schools should be opened or shouldn't be opened. Mm-hmm. Right now we're recording during the coronavirus 2020 opus, whatever. We're in the middle of this crazy, but but she was saying that people, that we need to keep the people safe and we need to keep the schools closed. And, you know, as a homeschooling dad, that doesn't affect me directly, but it does affect me in the sense that my neighbors maybe want to go to school. There may be teachers that want to teach at school. Right. And they should be allowed that freedom to make that choice.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the thing. I wish the schools would stay closed so long they fall into decay. The very buildings. I'm with you there. You know, But I'm also in favor of all this money that's taken from me by force to provide salaries for teachers and electric bills for school buildings and, 6-figure salaries for school superintendents. I say, give that money back to me and let me provide for the education of my child. Now, I'm not saying, Mike, you could teach your kids. I couldn't teach them, but I can teach them things you can't teach them. And that's how, think about it. I don't understand why people don't want that society. I won't be good teaching my children math, but I've got plenty of people in my life that could, and I'd be willing to pay for their time, right? For them to do that. And then you get your kids' teachers are accountable to you.
Right.
How do you ever think that it makes, because someday it's my opinion that you as a father and your wife, you'll sit down across a little table like we are, but on the other side of that table will be Jesus. And you're going to have to explain to him what you're going to have to defend your actions of what you did with the children that he gave you. And that's going to be an uncomfortable conversation if your best excuse is, well, I had to go to work, so I had to send them somewhere.
Right. It was the only option for me when.
That you have, I taught hundreds of kids in the charter school. I maybe knew 3 families personally. So I could have been in there teaching any number of incorrect and divisive lessons no one would have ever known. And that's disturbing to me, and that's why I think there's going to be, and as Brother Sidney said, there's going to be a group of people who aren't raised in that environment who will come to help save us all. And so the idea is we need to disabuse ourselves of the notion that just because 200 and something years ago, our fathers were able to form this union, that we must stay with it because we aren't our father's children. We don't learn the lessons they learned. We don't live the lives they live. We know nothing of agriculture. Mm-hmm. James Madison, Jefferson, Washington, those men were farmers. You say what you want, but they knew how to run a farm. We don't. You think Donald Trump would know how to, and there's no slam on Mr. Trump. It's just, I wouldn't know either. Do you know when to plant corn? Do you know what month to plant it? What month to cultivate it? No.
Right.
So we don't live the lives our founders lived. We don't learn the lessons our founders learned. We're not frankly capable of maintaining this union that they created as we are. Now, is it possible to hang on a generation and there arise a generation that can take over and restore and teach and be virtuous enough and wise enough to do that? Maybe. But that's neither here nor there to us because me and you will be gone.
Right.
But what's important for us is
to plant the seeds.
There you go. Get your home squared away and then go and find like-minded people.
And you said a word several times that I've heard in other places, restore.
Yeah.
There's I've heard it with you probably 4 times in this discussion alone. I heard it in and I can't remember the gentleman's name. He was another historian talking about restoring the meaning of the Declaration. Mm-hmm. Which I think is important.
Right.
I think that's something that's misunderstood.
The banner of my website is the Declaration, not the Constitution, because you can't possibly understand the Constitution until you understand the Declaration.
The Declaration is the heart of what we're all about. The Constitution is just the, I don't know, the policy book,
no, it's exactly
the
right.
general handbook of
the Declaration
instructions.
is like the Bible, and the Constitution is the general handbook of instruction.
Right. Yeah. And so in order to understand, and I think that's especially when we get into legalists, people who are trying to break the Constitution, and we see that every day. Right. They do it on legalistic bounds. They don't understand natural law. They don't understand that the Constitution was written just like the federal government was created by the states to fulfill some needs. Right. The Constitution was created in lieu of, was the child of the Declaration.
Well, and in the book, What Degree Man, I explained that the federal government, there's a concept in law called principal agent. And the federal government is the agent, the employee of the principals, who are the states. The states created this position called federal government, and it's meant to perform a certain act. And if it doesn't, then its acts are, as Hamilton, a man whom I almost never quote, Hamilton said, null, void, and of no legal effect. He said it is a usurpation and deserves to be treated as such, which he didn't believe, but he wanted the Constitution to be ratified, so he said that. And what he said was true. So
wasn't that why Aaron Burr got in a lot of trouble? Was because he kept going to the Western states saying, hey, you guys can secede. You guys can do what you
Ultimately, that's why Aaron Burr went on trial for treason, was because, man, that's a show of another time. Aaron Burr is one of these guys that fascinates me. When I was a younger guy, I was like, man, Aaron Burr has all the ingredients to be a varsity founding father, and he's lost to history because of certain things that happened. But Hamilton didn't like it because Aaron Burr's like, what Madison and Jefferson are saying makes a lot of sense. But that's neither here nor there.
Right.
But
anyway, sidetrack.
What was this? Oh, so the principal agency.
Yes.
So if I hire a personal assistant, in the law that is called my agent, and I'm called the principal. Now, in real life, it's boss and employee.
Right.
But in the law, that's called principal and agency. If I will have a contract with my agent, and I literally have an agent, and he is allowed to book me for speeches and I list the topics, and he has to book me in only Marriott hotels, right? And I never speak on the Sabbath. And so let's say that my agent's name is John. Let's say John books me to speak pro-abortion on a Sunday,
right,
staying at a Best Western.
Yeah.
Would anyone listening to us right now think that I was obliged to do that?
No, you're the boss.
No, it's laughable. It is laughable. But when the federal government, who is meant to be the employee of the states, tells the states, hey, you have to enforce certain regulations or you don't get some of your tax money back, most people say, well, that's right. Yeah, that's constitutional. It's ridiculous.
So let's talk about that, because obviously there's going to be a lot of people listening to this screaming, what about the Supremacy Clause? What about the, so discuss that. Why is that not a valid argument too?
Okay. Can we, I always have this little constitution with me so we can see why it's not a valid, just so people don't, I hate when people think Joey's just freestyling his stuff. And
right.
He just wants us to see things his way. I do want you to see things, but it's not because it's my way. It's because it's true. And I had to come to it. I was a good little Republican. I campaigned for George Bush Sr. as my first job in politics.
Oh, wow.
And then, he goes but I did, at the time I'm like Republicans.
That's the thing. You have to know that you got to read the book, as Jim Rohn said.
That's right. There you go. Article 6. So this is the so-called Supremacy Clause. It's the second clause of Article 6. This Constitution and the laws of the United States, meaning the laws made by Congress, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, And all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, meaning the federal government, shall be the supreme law of the land. Now, there's the phrase that everybody glides right over, and that's in pursuance thereof. The Constitution and the laws made by Congress are the supreme law when they are made in pursuance of constitutional authority. It does not say when made, it doesn't leave out that phrase. It doesn't say the Constitution and all laws of the United States are the supreme law.
Right.
The Constitution and the laws of the United States are the supreme law when made in pursuance of the limited authority of the Constitution. So when made in violation thereof, you have no promise.
Yeah.
It's not.
What would be an example
law.
of that? Can you think of an example of where it would be right for them to say, no, the law given by the federal government is correct?
Is correct?
Is correct. Yeah. What would be an example of that? Where we follow that to the
right, where it says that well, if you look at Article 1, Section 8, right, that's the list of congressional powers. Well, even other things, let's say president, because he's the highest profile.
Okay.
The president can nominate Supreme Court judges.
Right.
And he does. And the Senate is supposed to confirm them with advice and consent, and they do. Now, it may be a bit more of a circus, but that's constitutional. President Trump says, I want, Judge Gorsuch to be a Supreme Court, or what's the Kavanaugh? I want Kavanaugh to be a Supreme Court justice. That's constitutionally sound. You couldn't say he can't do that.
So Nevada couldn't come and say, no.
We don't want Kavanaugh.
Right. We don't recognize him as part.
I guess they could if they wanted to just leave the union, which is their right. But they wouldn't be constitutionally sound to say
to stay within.
Trump can't nominate Kavanaugh.
Right. That
because
makes sense.
in here, in Article 2, all you see is you can nominate judges. That's it. So you nominate judges. Now, when President Trump signs an executive order that says bump stocks are now machine guns, that's not constitutional.
Right.
Because it's not within the powers given to the president. And so if we allow the president, the Congress, the Supreme Court can't make. Do you notice what isn't listed in Article 6? The Constitution, the laws of the United States, but what's never listed? Supreme Court opinions.
Right.
No,
executive orders.
You laugh, but yeah, shouldn't we teach our kids this?
Absolutely.
Shouldn't we be do you know, Mike, I went to law school and had a whole year of constitutional law. We never cracked open the Constitution.
That's shocking.
When one of the first days asked if we could read one of the Federalist Papers in regard to something we were talking about, the whole class turned on me. They were like, dude, let's just get through our stuff. We don't need to, right? But you notice in here, there's no list of executive orders. There's no list of bureaucratic regulations. There's no list of Supreme Court opinions. Do you think for a minute that James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, if the Supreme Court made an opinion saying every state must recognize the, quote, right of same-sex couples to be legally married, whether they agreed with that philosophically, there's no way you think that they would be like, I guess we have to do it. I mean, Jefferson made that so clear when he's like, we did not establish a black-robed oligarchy.
Right.
But do you realize, Mike?
You know what? Okay, I got to stop you right there for a second, because I think just that one phrase will shock a lot of people, because we live in a world of bossa nova, new wave, everything is new. We don't remember anything past our generation. A black robe. Think that the founders never thought about this. Like they never thought that the Supreme Court could overstep their bounds, or they never thought that the president would want to act as a king, or that the legislature would just give up. I think it's interesting that these are things that were literally thought about and discussed and argued about.
Right, but they knew that from history. They knew that the Praetorian Guard became the de facto electors of the rulers of Rome.
Right.
They knew that the Star Chamber in England was used to oppress political dissidents. So they had experience from history. They read history. They knew what to anticipate. But we don't read real history, so we have no idea what to anticipate or why. But yeah, I mean, you think about it. You had a state, even a state like California. California passed an amendment to its constitution saying marriage was the union of a man and a woman.
That's right.
California,
right.
The People's Republic of California passed that. And then 5 people, 3,000 miles away from Sacramento, 5 people said, no, it means any 2 adults. And the next day, every county in California was offering marriage licenses to same-sex couples. Mike, one of the famous things that kids love that I say is, tyrant's gonna tyrant. It's what they do. The Supreme Court's gonna violate the Constitution. So what? That doesn't matter to me. The real issue in that is, why did those millions of Californians obey the opinion of 5 octogenarians?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question.
Well, it's what David Hume says. This is the great mystery of history. How the few come to command the many.
Wow. That I got to think about that, because that is a pattern that we see over and over. Mm-hmm. And it's complacency by the many times.
Yeah, I would argue it's a lack of virtue and ignorance as well.
Yeah.
We don't know enough to say, how many in your neighborhood, if you walked around and did a poll and said, how many of you can name the things in the Constitution described as the supreme law of the land? How many people could tell you 5 of the actually listed powers of Congress? How many people could tell you which article of the Constitution controls the legislative branch?
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean,
but and this is the thing. How many could tell you the name of one let's be generous. How many could name 3 Supreme Court justices versus how many can name every one of the members of the Kardashian family?
We see what's important, right?
That's gallows humor. It's like, and I'm not trying to exalt or inflate the importance of the Supreme Court justices. What I'm saying is our education is non-existent. I mean, the word educare, to lead you out from the darkness to the light. Our education, when our founders knew it, was meant to make you a better man. Education today is meant to make you a more obedient subject.
You know what? I think on that, I think we're going to take a pause. Again, this is Mike Levitt with And If Love Remains, talking to Dr. Joe Wolverton, his book, What Degree of Madness? Madison's Method to Make America States Again. You have a website coming soon.
It's up now, and you can get a few things on it, but it's by the end of this week. So let's say Monday, a week from today, it should be much more functional than it is. It's not fully functional, but it's teacherofliberty.com.
Teacherofliberty.
Yep.
Liberty.com.
We'll have the books for sale. We'll also have some merchandise for sale. I have t-shirts that
you do have the best t-shirts.
Yeah, the t-shirts are pretty awesome. I mean, I've had students send me, I'll go to people's houses and they'll have their family portrait and there'll be some of their kids in these t-shirts. And I'm like, my dad never would have let me wear a cheeky t-shirt in our family portraits. But anyway, yeah, so teacherofliberty.com, and it'll be schedule of classes that I'm teaching and how to get in touch with me, and also the books and the merchandise. And the new book, because the new book is coming out in 2 weeks. The Founder's Recipe. I just, while we've been sitting here, got the PDF proof of thing. So
That's exciting.
I'm excited about that. Yeah.
And that's a powerful thing, because I know that's a true labor of love. I know for you has been
literally, Mike, this is going to sound silly to many people, but you will understand what I'm saying by this. That is literally the reason I was put on the earth, was to produce that book. And it's getting close to where, let's say, maybe not put on the earth period, but certainly the reason I was sent to Arizona.
Yeah.
Was to be put in a position to make that and to offer it, and now say, there you have it. If you want it, it's there. If you don't, that's fine too. But if you want to raise up your kids to have the sort of wisdom and understanding that our founders had, there you go. Here's a turnkey book where you can help them get a little bit closer.
Well, I'm excited to have you again on talk about that book. We can also find you on YouTube.
Yeah, Teacher of Liberty on YouTube. I have several videos. There'll be another one available tomorrow on much of the things we've been talking about today. Is what the idea of what does it mean to be a people? What does that mean? We are a people, we the people. What are you talking about?
Oh, yeah.
What does a people mean? And I'm just going to, again, for you who have ears to hear, you will hear. I'm just going to present what the men who influenced our founders, what they taught our founders about what it means to be a people and how it applies to us, and how understanding that can help us maybe solve a few of the problems that we're facing.
I can't wait to check it out. And I hope all of you will check out his work. Again, Dr. Joe Wolverton, teacherofliberty.com. And this has been And If Love Remains. We'll see you next time. Thanks again.